Welcome to TBR Deep Dive. I'm Kirsten McCloskey.
And I'm Emma Daughter.
We are super excited to be with you today, and let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
All right. So our first question today is coming from day 22, Genesis 30, verses 11 and verses 20. So let me read the question, and then we'll get into the verse. How important are the names Leah and Rachel give their children? So a couple of examples of these women naming their children in verse 11 of Genesis 30:11, Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. And then in verse 20, Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun.
So these are the kind of details in the Old Testament that can cause our eyes to glaze over, especially when we're reading a long list. But they can be very important. Arguably, they are, because they're at a minimum helpful clues about who these women were because they reflected their personal struggles.
Yeah.
So the names give you insight not just into the child that's being named, but also the mother who's naming the child. And in Genesis 30:11, for example, as you just read, she names her son Gad, meaning good fortune, or a troop comes, expressing joy that God has blessed her through the maidservant, which is interesting to consider. Then on the flip side, Genesis 30:20, she names another son Zebulun, meaning honor or dwelling, hoping that her husband Jacob would honor her, right? So the name is not just speaking some sort of memo or message into the life of the child. It's a reflection of what's going on in the life of the mother. She wants her husband to honor her.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, and I feel like,
go ahead.
Okay, so I think too, let's just zoom out briefly and kind of talk about names in the Old Testament just in general.
Sure.
So what we're seeing here is the biblical concept of naming someone actually mirrors what the ancient Near East practice would be as well. So what was common at that time, which was that a name expressed essence. And so to know the name of a person was to know that person's character or nature. And it also, I think this makes sense with what we're seeing with these women. Personal names for their children can express hope for the future, or it could be based on the circumstances of their birth. So with Reuben, that means, look, a son, which I think is so fun. And then, look, a son. And then if we think of Esau, for instance, with Jacob and Esau, Esau means hairy. So it was just a characteristic about him.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you could see it both ways, right? Because at the end of the day, we're saying what's possible versus what's likely, or what is just an observation we can make. So what I'm sharing is more of an observation. Hey, we can look at this and see the emotions and circumstances of the mother being tied to the names. But we can also study and say culturally there was a pattern as to how children were named. And the answer's probably somewhere in the middle. So are the names significant? Yeah. They're helpful. They at least teach us something about a character, if not 2 characters.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think too that the names, what can be cool is that names can really give us that insight. We don't want to put something into the text that's not there. I think that's what we're kind of trying to guard against. So it's maybe we don't need to look at every single name and think whoa, this must mean this and this and this. But it's definitely, we definitely see, I would say kind of overall in the Old Testament, that names are really important. Absolutely. And so I think that's kind of the general principle is that, names are really important. And so that is sometimes something you want to pay attention to. The other thing that I was thinking about with this is that, again, zooming out a little bit further from just the Rachel and Leah story, is that names sometimes are also changed. And so that can be fun to look at too. We see, for instance, when God changes Jacob's name to Israel. So that's a really important moment. And that's something that we see God do kind of throughout Genesis. He changes Abram's name from Abram to Abraham. So, I think names in general, they can represent a few different things, which we've sort of already covered. So they can reveal the true nature of the person, so that essence quality. They can clarify a relationship between people. And so when God changes somebody's name, that actually is like a relational
an indicator of a change in relationship or change in calling, perhaps.
Right. And then like what you were already saying, we can see it as insight into someone's personal struggle, what they have going on at that time. And
totally.
So, yeah, I think that's interesting.
Kirsten, what tips would you give listeners as they're getting ready to not getting ready. They are continuing to read through the Old Testament and are going to encounter a lot of names.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's such a good question. And that was another thing that I was thinking about with this question is this can be a really fun area of study. So if you want to dive even deeper, we know you do.
We know you
do. So if you want to dive even deeper, that can be a fun thing to look at as we progress through the biblical story. There's the names of places, which can be really important. And then names of people and what the names mean. And this even can be fun, like when we get in the prophets, their names are very important. And there's meaning behind their names for the way that God is speaking through them and what message he has to give to the people. So I think it's just a fun thing to pay attention to and like go on your little deep dive and do some name research yourself. But don't go crazy maybe.
Or do, I don't know. It's great, Kirsten. Yeah. Well, the next question comes from day 22, and it specifically comes from Genesis 31:19, which reads, Laban had gone to shear his sheep. That is such a tongue twister.
Yes, you did.
Laban
so
had gone
good.
to shear his sheep. Shear his sheep. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And the question, why did Rachel steal her father's household gods? What were the gods, in quotation mark, with a little g?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. So I think sometimes this story we're sort of like, wait, why does Rachel have gods? Like this is so weird, right?
What?
It feels weird.
And why would she want to take them?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so such a good question. One possibility is that she might have believed that whoever possessed these gods held the rightful claim to her family's inheritance. So that would have been a cultural understanding at the time. And so since she was a daughter of Laban and not a son of Laban, like the sons would have been the designated heir and the family gods would have never been legitimately transferred like over to Jacob, meaning the inheritance would have never come to Jacob. And it wouldn't have gone to the daughters either. And so this maybe could be a way that Rachel is trying to ensure that she has some part of an inheritance.
To strengthen her claim to the inheritance.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting too because, I mean, they're leaving. So I'm not sure
It's interesting that she cared about it enough to take.
Right. Yeah, so that's one thing. I don't know. What did you find?
I found the same. That in some ancient Near Eastern cultures, people believed that having possession of the family gods could strengthen your claim to inheritance. So because you had the gods, you were more entitled to get from the father, and that she might have wanted to secure Jacob's rights, which you just said against her father. Like she might have been recognizing, okay, I am not a man, but I'm married to a man. And so let me see if I can get him.
Yeah. Some portion of the inheritance.
Perhaps, I mean, this is just speculative, but perhaps she thought, hey, he's worked for my dad for so long. He has earned this. I've watched him struggle and faithfully complete all of these jobs.
Right.
I'm going to up the stakes, make it a little more likely that things will finally go well for this guy.
Yeah. Well, and it's just interesting because I think part of what we're seeing here is just all throughout the Genesis story. People are struggling to understand. They're struggling to trust. They're struggling to know Yahweh.
Yep.
And it just feels like this is another example of Rachel not – either she doesn't know the blessing that Jacob carries. She doesn't know who Yahweh is and what's been promised. Like that I think is definitely a possibility. Because Yahweh had promised the inheritance to Abraham, then to Isaac, and then to Jacob. But Rachel, in doing this, is trying to, in kind of a scheming way, which is interesting because Jacob is such a schemer, but in her own kind of scheming way, look out for herself in some sense, look out for the family. And again, this could have been like a very normal not custom thing, like a culture thing.
Choice,
Right. That maybe to us seems so foreign, which it is. But
it raises a great question, which is what were these household gods? What was the purpose of them?
Right.
What were they?
Yeah.
And it's the Hebrew word for teraphim. So this would be suggesting figurines that were used for several reasons, all of which might point to her motive. So one of them is the inheritance claims, but another would be a shared family religion or superstitious practices.
Yeah.
So if it's the religious use, they were literally small idols made by human hands for household worship or divination. And she may have taken them because she still had lingering ties to idolatry.
Yeah.
That's an option. Like there's a world where this was just a sinful choice.
Yeah,
that she
100%. And I think kind of along that, one thing that I was looking up was saying that she might have actually been afraid that these household gods would have helped Laban find them.
Yes, so because kind of they'd be associated with
yeah.
protection and blessing. So if Laban had them, well, then he gets the protection and blessing, and we want that. So we should take them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, why is this little piece in this story important? I think it's telling us what happened in these people's lives. So remember, Genesis is not like how to be the people of God right now. Like that's not what we're focused on. We're learning the story of how God took Abraham and blessed him and then is continuing that storyline throughout.
Through the family.
Right. And so we're just seeing the way people are kind of either aligning themselves with that or not.
Or growing and understanding it.
Exactly.
Like we know that Jacob's God, Yahweh, was the true protector.
Yep.
And that he was learning that.
Yep.
And maybe you could arguably say had mostly learned that.
Yep.
But Rachel may not have been fully convinced yet. She might not have been there.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's just God is calling them into relationship with him. And there's a lot of steps on that journey. And there's, these women are happy enough to leave their homeland and follow Jacob, but maybe they don't, again, have that full trust or full understanding of who Yahweh is. And he's so patient with them and with this story and how it's unfolding.
That's right.
And, so I think my favorite thing about this story is that it actually really just demonstrates how silly these non-gods are. Like she took this thing, like you were saying before, that she thought would protect her, but she is now following Yahweh, who is the ultimate protector. And these gods, they can be hidden under a saddle. They were made by human hands. They could be stolen.
Yep.
Like Yahweh can't be stolen. He can't be taken to this new place. So it's just so different than who we actually see Yahweh as the true God presenting himself in the story too. So it's kind of a fun contrast to see there. So yeah. Good. All right. Should we move on to the next question?
Let's do it.
Okay. So our next question comes from day 23. And it's from Genesis 32, 22 to 32. And so if you remember, this is the story of Jacob wrestling with God. And so the question is, how does TLC know this was a theophany? Was this a pre-incarnate Jesus?
I love it. So this is a question that I would suppose a recaptain had listened to the Bible recap episode and was like, hey, I want to double click on this. Like, Tara said something. How'd she get there?
Yeah.
So in this text, Jacob wrestles through the night with a quote-unquote man. But the story itself and what we read elsewhere in Scripture shows us that this is not an ordinary guy. He's not your average dude. There's something different about him. So what does the Bible actually say? Let's pause on the conclusion Tara Lee came to. Verse 30, Jacob said, I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. So Tara Lee's right to come to the conclusion that she does. This verse is why interpreters or theologians call this a theophany, meaning an appearance of God. And this mysterious man had supernatural power because he dislocates Jacob's hip with a touch and gives him a new name, Israel. So what else then does the Bible say about this guy? Hosea 12, 3 through 4 looks back at this event, reflects on it, and says, Jacob struggled with God and the angel. So there's a lot of varying views on what that means and why Hosea would speak that way. But at a minimum, this confirms that Jacob's opponent was a spiritual being. So whether this guy he wrestled with was an angel or was actually a theophany, meaning an appearance of God, this was a unique occurrence.
Yes.
In a later prophet confirmed that it was a spiritual being of some kind.
Yes.
It wasn't an everyday guy. So is it a pre-incarnate Christ? That would then be the next question.
Right. That takes it a step further to
Yes. So Charlie said theophany. Okay, let's go Christophany, an appearance of Christ.
Yep.
Some theologians do believe it is, that this is pre-incarnate Jesus wrestling with Jacob. Because Jesus, why would they think that, Jesus is the visible manifestation of God. John 1:18, Colossians 1:15. He is the image of the invisible God. Whereas others would say, no, this is God's angelic representative acting on behalf of God himself.
Yeah.
And scripture doesn't explicitly say it was Jesus.
Yeah.
So it is okay to come to that conclusion that it's a Christophany, but you're taking all the pieces of the puzzle, divine being, giving the blessing, Jacob's response, and saying this is God himself. And because Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God, it must be then a Christophany. So those three things point to it being God himself.
Yes. Yeah. And so again, the most restrictive way that we can think of a theophany is that it's a visible appearance of God. And
like if you boil the definition down, what is
it's the
this?
manifestation. It is someone seeing God in a way that's tangible to their human senses. I think that's kind of interesting because, again, we don't really know what exactly that looks like. I mean, if Jacob is being described as wrestling with God, then there has to be, some kind of form or some kind of...
he's wrestling. I mean, watch a wrestling match on TV and it's like, this is two people.
Right. And so, again, we don't know exactly what the tangible experience to our human senses would be, but it's just kind of interesting to think about that in this story. But I do think that it's not bad to question whether it's, if it's a theophany, then is it also a Christophany? I do think that in asking that, though, we don't want to get so focused on debating whether it's one or the other.
Is it this or that?
Right. When again, we don't know. Like, we know that it's some sort of a theophany because even later, the man, so in Genesis 32:28, the man says to Jacob, so again, the theophany says to Jacob, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, which means he strives with God, or God strives, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. So the God theophany piece is definitely in there. I think the question for the Christophany is just like, okay, do we really need to nail this down and say this is what it is? And is it adding, is that changing your interpretation or adding something to it? And it's probably not necessarily. Although I don't know. Do you think that
I'm trying to think
it?
what would be the implications if we think that it is a Christophany. I suppose it's evidence of like God's consistent pursuit of people. Like that he would choose even in this time.
In a theophany?
Well, it would, but what is the ultimate picture of God's pursuit of mankind? Sending the Son.
Okay.
So if you're saying all of these theophanies in the Old Testament, like you could throw in Melchizedek.
Right.
Okay, let's say if we say Melchizedek's a Christophany and we say Jacob wrestling with God is a Christophany, okay, well now we can say, God has been consistently pursuing his people by sending Jesus to them.
That's so interesting.
Now, I don't think that minimizes the character of God if it's not. Because the pinnacle of God pursuing mankind is still God sending Jesus, the whole Christmas story, everything we celebrate on Easter.
Yep.
That's still the pinnacle of God's pursuit. Yeah. But if you want to argue for a consistency of God pursuing mankind in that way, you could point to Christophanies. But I think at the end of the day, Tara-Lee on the Bible Recap episode can confidently and appropriately say, this is a theophany, and hold that as her personal conviction. And maybe even, I don't know, she's not here. Yeah. Maybe she thinks it's a Christophany, but it's helpful for her to present the more general view that we can be more certain of than to say, I'm going to take a really firm stance and draw a line in the sand and say it's Jesus when we just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the amazing thing about this, and you kind of mentioned this talking about the Christophany, but God is choosing to reveal himself to creation in the whole story. And this is one of the ways where he shows up and does this in a very tangible, unique, kind of crazy, miraculous way. And it's just really cool.
Yeah, it grows our awe of God.
Yes, like our awe, noticing his intentionality with the world, with the people that he created. Like he is very personal in general. And we see in this story kind of this personal encounter. I mean, it's just really cool, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really cool. All right. Okay, let's move on to our next question. So this question comes from day 23, and it is from Genesis 32, 24 to 25. And so we're still talking about Jacob wrestling with God. So this is a second question about this. So I'm going to read the verse.
A dive deeper moment.
A dive deeper moment, exactly. So we're going so deep. Okay. So the verse is Genesis 32, 24 to 25. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. So the question is, why did God even wrestle with Jacob? Couldn't he, God, have won that wrestling match easily?
So good.
Yes. So is the answer to the second part yes? God could have won the wrestling match easy?
Let's just take care of that one right now. Yes, God could have won that so easily. Snap of a finger, just like in an instant with the touch.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's yes. So there's quite a few reasons why God did this or may have done this. Mm-hmm. Again, anytime we ask a why question, if the scriptures don't explicitly state the answer, we're drawing inferences.
Yeah. We're speculating.
We don't know why God does almost everything, right? Let's be real. But here's some options.
It's fun to think about.
Yeah, it's fun to think about. And it does help us, I think, better understand God's character.
Yeah,
when we reflect on why God might do things.
And like where he's at. I think it's always helpful too, where are we at in the story?
Yes.
And so what is he trying to show about himself to these
this
specific
person
people
at this time? Yes. So one option is that God wanted Jacob's surrender, not domination over him. Okay. So the act of wrestling, I don't know a whole lot about wrestling. I don't watch a whole lot of wrestling. But
if we've got wrestlers out there,
you let us know those comments on YouTube. Just go wild. But the act of wrestling is revealing to us that Jacob wouldn't have easily relinquished self-reliant striving.
Yeah.
So if we're wrestling, it's different than playing basketball on a team or playing soccer with a team or whatever team sports were played back then. But it's a individual sport.
Yep.
So my success in this match is entirely dependent on my effort and my performance compared to your effort and your performance.
Yeah.
So God allowed Jacob to struggle until God decided he'd be physically unable to continue, forcing him to cling independence by displacing his hip, right? Yeah. So only in Jacob's weakness did true blessing and transformation occur. It wasn't until the match was over that we see God's response to this situation. So I think it's highlighting God's purpose of reshaping perhaps Jacob's heart more than demonstrating, hey, let me show you how powerful God is. He can whip Jacob into shape in a moment's notice or let him struggle for a while and then show him who's boss. That's not the heart of God. The heart of God is loving and caring toward his children, but he also cares about our sin deeply.
Right.
And he wants to teach us.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that was interesting to me thinking about this is that once Jacob figures out who he's wrestling, he demands a blessing. Demands a blessing. And so far in his life, he's only gotten blessings by being deceptive. So he's stolen the birthright from his brother Esau. He was slippery in his interactions with Laban and just the things that he did there. Like he is the king of deception. And so God does bless Jacob in this moment. And it's kind of a confirmation of that blessing that Jacob had tried so hard to like deceptively get his whole life.
Yes. So some commentators say that this act symbolized transformation and identity change because then what happens? His name changed. His name meant deceiver, but through this encounter, God renames him Israel.
Yeah.
And that name Israel is commonly understood as one who struggles with God.
Yeah.
With God being the key word. So this renaming is representing this profound shift from a reliance on the schemes, as you just pointed out, to a reliance on God because we're now struggling with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's so interesting because we're already talking about names already. So this is such a good example of, this is a really powerful and important name change for this individual. And God is the one who changes his name.
Yes.
And I think the point of this story for Jacob and for the people of Israel who are going to be hearing and reading this story and telling it to their kids and passing it down is pretty clear that Israel's ultimate victory would come not by the usual way that nations gain power, but through the power of divine blessing.
That's right.
Yeah. And so that just puts a whole different spin on, again, we've got the Jacob story, but then we also have, what is Israel supposed to know
what is this,
about
this blessing? Well, and then I think we can say, what is Israel supposed to know? Then we can go practical. What does this show or teach us? What can we learn from Jacob's experience? And we see that spiritual growth often, like most frequently, we see this also in Romans 5, comes from prolonged struggle.
Yeah.
That the wrestling match, it's an illustration of this. So spiritual maturity may require extended, raw encounters with God where we do struggle, but that struggle should push us to him.
Yeah.
And so maybe somebody out there listening, you can relate to this in a personal way because you're walking through a struggle right now. And so me saying, we often grow in prolonged seasons of struggle is not what you want to hear because we're often looking for our struggles to be alleviated, which is so natural because we long for a restored world where we don't have to struggle. But if we cling to Jesus and are willing to wrestle with him in the struggle, we grow.
Yeah.
Or we learn, or we're disciplined, or we see God's character more clearly and we're left in awe of him. Like you could look at somebody like Jeremiah as an example who struggled his entire ministry. He didn't see fruit in the sense that his audience was responding, in droves. But he clung to God at a greater and greater level of intimacy through his struggle. And that alone is such a prize compared to staying the same rather than becoming transformed either in our character or our relationship of God and understanding of who he is. But we got to go on to the next question.
Okay, perfect.
The next question comes from day 23, and specifically it comes from the text Genesis 34, which is a heavier story. So in Genesis 34, we read about this very tragic moment within Jacob's family. His daughter Dinah goes out. She's visiting women, and Shechem, the son of the local ruler, saw her, took her, and violated her in an incredibly inappropriate way. And so what follows is this heartbreaking picture of sin and injustice. Jacob's sons respond with deceit and violence, revenge, killing people. It becomes just an incredible mess. And the story's raw and painful. We see devastation caused by sin and the danger of responding to evil with more evil. So the question is, where is God in a story that is so dark and unfair? What should I do when parts of the Bible make me feel sad or angry?
Yeah. And that's a really good question because there's a lot of stories in the Bible where we could be asking this question. And there's going to be more to come, So we're in Genesis. There's definitely going to be more to come. So it's good to wrestle with a question like this. We see in this story, and again at various other places in the Bible, we see humanity at its worst. So humanity in general is depraved, sinful, and evil. And what makes many of these stories so painful is that many of the people who are taken advantage of are people that can really do nothing to defend themselves. And that's what we see in this story with Dinah. But another thing to keep in mind is that the stories in the Bible are telling us what happened. They're not telling us what should have happened. They're not telling us what God specifically wanted to happen.
These stories aren't telling us what we should do.
They're not telling us what we should do.
Or validating the tragic behaviors we're reading about.
Right. And so just because a story is recorded in the Bible doesn't mean that God condones the behavior. And oftentimes when there's no mention of God in a story or maybe a set of stories, like ding, ding, ding. That should be something that we notice.
Yep.
Because while God is always at work, there are certain times where he's not in that story.
Yeah, or the people have forgotten him. Mm-hmm. So like his name isn't mentioned in this chapter, but Genesis as a whole book reminds us that God is sovereign over every event.
Right.
So
and he's working through these people.
And he's working through these people. So the silence can also highlight, when we don't see God's name mentioned, how tragic life becomes when people act without him.
Yes. He's
He's in control, yes, but he also gives us, meaning mankind, freedom to make decisions.
Right.
And sometimes people choose wrong.
Right. And it shows us as well, I think it shows us the contrast between the goodness of God himself and the goodness he desires for humanity and the evil that humanity produces. Mm-hmm. The evil that humanity lives in and is running towards without God. And so we're also seeing how much we need God to step in and intervene because otherwise things like this happen. Can we think of it that way? Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's also helpful to recognize that the Bible, especially the Old Testament, does not airbrush the failures of God's people.
Yes.
Like we are going to see their failures on full display very clearly. It's God showing us the brokenness of humanity in full view. And I think that's helpful because it's relatable. Like somebody out there listening has probably personally experienced something like this. And God sees that and he hates it. So why is this story in the Bible? Well, God confronts sin of all kinds, and it helps us long for his justice and redemption. Yeah. Like, also think about this. How frustrating and alienating would it be if when we read the Bible, we never saw any people sinning or suffering? Right. That would be incredibly unrelatable. And I mean, entirely unrelatable because it's not the world we live in. The world has been broken by sin. But as believers, we get to see a through line of God working to redeem it. Like that should encourage us both when we sin, when we learn about other people sinning, and when we're sinned against.
Yep.
So for example, even through this incident where God's people both sin and are sinned against.
Right. Yeah. No one is good in this story.
Yeah,
no one's really
so much
coming out
mess
great
going
in this story.
on.
Yeah.
God preserves Jacob's family, the very family through whom the Messiah will come. Yep. And the darkness makes the light of Christ all the more necessary.
Yep. I know. That's so good. And what I think we do want to see in this story that there is a little bit of a recognition of how evil and outrageous this act was. So it's not like nobody cares. In Genesis 34:7, the sons of Jacob are very angry because they say what Shechem had done was an outrageous thing in Israel. Such a thing should not be done. So there is definitely this recognition of
this is wrong.
This is wrong. We think it's wrong. But then the problem comes as well. So we've got that horrible evil deed, but then the response of Jacob's sons, also horrible and evil. And their response wasn't justice. It was just another example of the fallenness of humanity.
Yep. Yeah. So then I think the question is, okay, the scriptures acknowledge that this incident was wrong. But that doesn't change the fact that I can read this story and empathize with Dinah and be sad or be angry that this happened. Yeah. So what do I do when the Bible makes me sad or angry? Number one, it's okay to lament before God, like the psalmist. I mean, bringing those raw emotions to the Lord is encouraged because he welcomes our tears and meets us with compassion and wants to hear our questions. And I think remember the big story because Genesis 34 points to our need for a redeemer. When we feel angry at injustices, we're echoing God's own heart against sin. He didn't want it to be this way. He wanted it to be different.
That's a really good point.
I think we can let the text grow our compassion. So stories like this remind us that our world is still full of victims of abuse and violence all over, not just in our country, but the entire world is full of victims of abuse and violence. So instead of looking away, God calls his people to be agents of healing and hope and justice. Micah 6:8.
Yeah.
So what do? We fix our hope on the cross. On the cross, Jesus entered the worst injustice and violence of all, and he triumphed. So because of him, sin and darkness don't have the last word.
Yes.
Revelation 21:4-5. So when scripture stirs up sadness or anger, we don't want to run from those feelings. We want to bring them to God. Let them deepen our longing for Christ, and then let them move us toward compassion for those who suffer.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's so good. And like, where is God in the story? Back to that kind of, how, where is he? Why did this happen? The reality is God is always at work. God is always there. He's always redeeming a broken world full of evil people. And I think our response of really wanting justice, because that's what we feel when we're sad or angry about the story.
We want to make the wrong right.
Right. We want justice. The reality is that God himself is bringing that. And it might not be immediately, which is generally when we want it, but it is the long-term redemption plan that justice will be served. And so remember, we started it, Genesis 1 and 2 were great. We were, yay, Genesis 1 and 2. Now Genesis 3 and through the rest of the story. It's a long way to get
until
to
he
Revelation.
comes back.
Yes, exactly. It's a long way to get to Revelation. So there are some really difficult and confusing things along the way. And that's okay. But the reality is God is making all things new, both in the already and in the not yet that's still to come.
Thanks for taking a deep dive with us, and we will see you next week as we continue to read, understand, and love the Bible and the God who wrote it.